History is full of madmen who have come to power in the world and who have changed the course of history. There are many personalities who committed follies. Some may have thought they were strange habits, but they originally came as a result of their owners suffering from dementia or madness. Caligula, one of the most famous crazy history, he was able to reach the rule of the Romans and was able to overthrow the reins of the Roman Empire under his hand and became the Roman emperor. And from here he exploited his power in establishing the most heinous crimes against his patron, one of the ugliest works of Caligula that he claimed divinity. And not only that, but he was always trying to find a way to reincarnate the attributes of God, from resurrecting the dead and controlling the sunset and sunrise, as well as the appearance of the moon and its disappearance, hence the injury of a state of madness, and wanted to enter his name in history and immortalized among the greats. He locked the granaries so that the people live in famine, and indeed the victims of this famine huge numbers of people. And strange that he found his pleasure in that famine, because he felt that it shows the death of people. When famine is lifted and grain is given to them, death will be lifted from them and thus revived. Nero. Nero was the victims of thousands of innocent Romanians, although the reins of the Roman Empire fell into the hands of Nero. But in fact he did not have any passion for matters of governance and power, and did not seek them at all. But his mother is the one who sought to reach her son to rule, and it is said that at that time she took advantage of the weakness of the Roman Emperor Claudius, and killed him and brought her son Nero instead, although he is not entitled to the position. Since Nero took power, thousands of citizens he was poisoning. He did not waste his time talking to anyone who opposed him. He was injecting poison directly to him, from the people that Nero poisoned his mother, teacher, army commander, and many others. What is most famous about Emperor Nero is that he burned the whole of Rome and set it on fire for days. King Charles VI. The King of France was called by his people as Charles the Madman. However, he ruled France for a very long time, from 1380 to 1422, about 42 years. He is described as very normal at the beginning of his reign, but after several years violent psychological symptoms began to appear on him in various forms, such as completely forgetting his name, and completely forgetting that he is the King of France, and no longer recognizes his wife or children at all, and considers them strangers to him. He never saw them. In the year 1405 he suffered a strange condition, by completely refusing to bathe or change his clothes for 5 months continuously, and began to adopt strange theories, such as his belief that his body is made of glass. And despite the strangeness of this belief, modern psychiatry has already proved that some psychiatric patients suffer from the same idea and believe that their bodies are made of glass, and it is possible to shatter at any moment. King George III, probably the second most famous crazy prince in history, due to the famous movie The Madness of King George. George III sat on the throne of England from 1760 to 1820, and he was suffering from a genetic disease as porphyria, which also infected Mary, Queen of the Scots, and the king's illness caused a difficult problem for England at the time. And in 1788, William Pitt, the Prime Minister, presented a solution, 1759 to 1806, by virtue of his son's rule of England, so that the deposed king spent his time in isolation. Empress Anna Ivanovna Russian. According to the Spanish newspaper El Pensante, Anna was not born to be a queen. She was placed on the throne by the Council of Russia, and they thought they could control her like a doll. But she did what she thought. Her story was an expected combination when absolute power was mixed with complete madness. The Empress of Russia, who ruled between 1730 and 1740, was famous for violent and brutal pranks, and she loved to kill people or torture them in ways that are considered funny. The Anna era was considered one of the most terrifying periods in the history of Russia. The secret police were established at the time, a word out of context that could have led a person to death or torture, a simple joke that could make a person suffer freefall directly from the city walls, and even poor cooking her food could lead the chef to execution altogether. When Empress Anna was not practicing her hobbies of torturing human beings and killing everyone who dares to do what she does not like, she was entertaining by humiliating whoever came to her mind, by forcing him to imitate a chicken or a dog for hours in front of her just in order to laugh her. And if the tradition was not good, or she did not like it and laugh her, she forced these people to sleep naked in the snow of Russia's winter. Ivan the Terrible. The King of Russia lost his parents as a child and was tortured by members of the Russian government, which led to his madness. At the age of 14 he took power, fed the prime minister dogs, and turned into a tyrant responsible for committing a large number of brutal massacres. It is said that the historians of the 19th century who discovered a lot of evidence and facts began to tremble in horror and stunned when they learned about the massacres and torture, which took place at the hands of a ruler haunted by suspicion and suspicion of the possibility of being subjected to severe punishment for committing those massacres. The preferred method of torture is to smash the legs before the victims are thrown into the snow, or make them crawl before they ask for mercy. Under Ivan, noble families and even their servants were the main targets. Rapes, mass murders of aristocratic women, and sometimes entire communities were exterminated or disposed of in any way. As for Ivan's psychological illness, it is not fully known, but he claims that his childhood was unhappy when he inherited the throne, if it was directed by members of the nobility in Russia, who he later liquidated. But his troubled emotions revealed themselves completely after the death of his wife Anastasia in 1650 at the age of 27. Charles Ghetto, former U.S. President James Garfield was assassinated by Charles Ghetto on July 2, 1881, after which he died on September 19th of the same year, making him the second shortest term of office of a president in the history of the United States of America. James Garfield achieved fame for his participation in the American Civil War, alongside the Union forces, obtaining the rank of colonel, and thus becoming a symbol of the state of Ohio, entering the U.S. House of Representatives in March 1863. It is said that Ghetto's father is an eccentric man, and this is not strange, as there is a biography of madness in the history of the family, and the mental hospital received many of his relatives and relatives. The son was engaged in studying within a university college, but he gave up on that and immersed himself in the life of that fundamentalist group, and took pictures as for his father in one of the letters. Ghetto inherited a bit of madness, and the spark of assassination began with him, since his interest in politics, when he joined the Republican Party and wrote a letter in support of Garfield after the latter's victory, the Republican nomination in the presidential campaign of 1880, and delivered the speech he wrote to members of the Republican National Committee, making him believe that he was largely responsible for Garfield's victory in the nomination. Al Capone is the most famous American gangster of the 20th century, as his gang took control of the state of Chicago in the United States of America, and this made him own a shady business worth millions of dollars. Capone developed syphilis, never seeking treatment, causing the disease to pass into neurosyphilis, resulting in dementia, and after spending 6.5 years in prison, Capone was released in 1939 to a mental hospital in Baltimore, where he stayed for 3 years. By 1946, psychiatrists in Baltimore conducted examinations and concluded that Al Capone's mental capacity was comparable to that of a 12-year-old boy, who, on January 25, 1947, died of cardiac arrest. Vincent van Gogh, it is the famous Dutch painter Van Gogh who has gone crazy, until he cut off his ear himself, as some believe, and tried to commit suicide several times until he finally agreed, and indeed died by suicide. Gogh was suffering from violent seizures as a result of brain problems due to his exaggerated addiction to alcohol and drugs. He had a great enthusiasm for painting on the one hand, and for religion on the other, so that he would finish his difficult and complex paintings very quickly, and then enter a long period of depression, which made all scientific theories confirm that he suffered from bilateral mental disorders. What some do not know is that Gogh was also a suspiciously prolific writer, which led some psychologists to assert that he was suffering from a mental illness associated with epileptic conditions, which makes him feel a great desire to write and blog. Although he was multi-psychiatric, it was not the cause of his failure, but turned him into a true genius in the eyes of everyone. Beethoven. We all know very well the international composer Beethoven, even if you are not interested in music, but Beethoven is a very famous name in human history, for those interested in music or not. Beethoven was a true genius, but he suffered long oppression and severe torture from his father, which led to him losing his sense of hearing later in his life. Beethoven suffered from violent psychological disorders, which made the creativity, energy, concentration, and splendor he produces in music offset by severe depression, loneliness, darkness, and permanent sadness. As usual, Beethoven was treated for these diseases, using drugs and alcohol, which unfortunately increased the symptoms of his disease, not reduced them as was common at the time. In conclusion of this video, I would like to express my deep gratitude to everyone who watched this video and spent some time with us. We appreciate your support and interest in our content. We hope that the video added value to you and that you enjoyed it and benefited from it. If you have any comments, questions, or suggestions for future videos, feel free to share them with us in the comments.